Hello and welcome to the TheSpiritGuides.co.uk network radio show with your host Mark Chatterton. Today I would like to welcome onto the show Dr. Jude Currivan, who is an acclaimed healer, cosmologist and astrologer. Jude has written 5 books, some of which we will be discussing today during the interview. She has also travelled widely, visiting many ancient sites all over the world. She is one of those rare academics who also has a strong belief in the spiritual. So a warm welcome to you, Jude.
It's great to be with you, Mark, and our listeners.
Okay, that's great. Let's start, if we go back to your early years, because you first encountered the world of spirit when you were a little girl. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Well, I think like most kids, it's perfectly natural to see maybe things that others don't see, or adults perhaps don't see. And I started to have such experiences when I was about 4 years old. They began one evening. I was settling down to sleep, and literally a light, a discarnate light, came into my room. And I don't remember exactly the detail that went from that, but I do very clearly remember that began a communication with a being that I came to know as Thoth, who the ancient Egyptians knew as their wisdom keeper, the god of wisdom. And over the years, that was so natural to me. I started to see auras, I started to have precognitive experiences, and many other that some people would say were paranormal or supernatural. For me, it's just part of the natural world. It's part of the way the cosmos actually is. And I suppose for many people, even if they've experienced that as a young kid, as I did, and I'm sure many of our listeners did, either friends who haven't, or teachers, or parents, or families, or whatever, if tend to sort of shut that down. They say, oh, you're just imagining things, or it's nonsense, or don't be silly. I was never told that because I never shared it with anyone. And so I just grew up believing, but more importantly, far more importantly, experiencing those realities as just part of my natural way of living in the world.
Fine. A few years later, you went up to Oxford to study physics. Was it hard for you sort of merging your spiritual beliefs with what you were discovering in science, or did you find that everything you knew spiritually eventually fitted in with the science?
Well, I guess I'd sort of begin by saying I don't see them as beliefs. It's not a faith, it's not a belief as such, it's a direct experience. And you're absolutely right. I wanted to go to Oxford because I was exploring. I'd explored for 14 years by that point, leading edge science and also ancient wisdom, and these experiences of a completely interconnected and conscious cosmos. And I wanted to understand, the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling has this amazing painting by Michelangelo showing the finger of God almost touching the finger of Adam, and there's this little lightning bolt going between them. I wanted to understand how that lightning bolt worked. I really wanted to understand as best I could how these non-physical realms that I was exploring actually plugged in with the physical realm that we experience as our primary reality. So that's why I went to Oxford. And it was hard because what I found was a very limited perspective of that. Fortunately, there was a man there called Dennis Sharma, who was a wonderful man, who really sort of was very open, I think, to wider perspectives. But I did find it quite narrow. But it was very, very helpful because it helped me to understand where, if you like, mainstream science, mainstream physics, quantum physics. So I had a very good grounding in quantum physics and cosmology that I've continued to build on independently ever since. Because, quantum physics and relativity are now over a century or around a century old. And we're moving now into a much more expansive, emergent understanding of the cosmos, essentially as a hologram. We can explore that if you'd like to, but a lot of leading edge scientists are now talking in those terms of information as actually being more important than space and time, more fundamental than space and time and matter and energy. And they're looking on trying to understand reality as informational based and holographic. And that's what I've experienced since I was 4 years old. So I'm really good with that. I'm really cool with that.
Moving on, you, for much of the 1980s and 90s, you worked as an accountant and had a high-powered business career. But by the mid-90s, you changed your direction. What was it that made you decide to go a different way?
I just felt I'd been there, bought the T-shirt. I was very fortunate. I worked in organisations and worked for bosses who really recognised what they saw as my financial talent, as it were, and gift for hard work. And I just progressed, and I got to a very senior level. I think in the very early 90s, I got appointed to the main board of a very large company, and that made me the most senior businesswoman in Britain. And I was very fortunate. I travelled the world doing some very interesting work, a lot of transformational work within organisations. But by the mid-90s, I literally had got to the point where I'd done it and it really wasn't challenging me anymore. And at the same time, I was feeling from a spiritual perspective that there was if you like, a deeper purpose to my being here, and I really had to step into that. It was almost as though all those threads of my life up till then were just coming into a point where I needed to take all of that experience, all of what I could offer, and take it into service of what I could see as a coming shift of consciousness for us all.
Right, because obviously I'd like to move on to your writing. What I want to ask you about your book, The Eighth Chakra, which you describe as the bridge between our ego-based perception and our higher awareness. Could you explain what this concept means in a little more detail?
Well, it really goes back to how I was experiencing, realities from a very early age. And of course, at that point and from then on, I was also reading about the spiritual traditions of people throughout time and around the world. And, there are universal sort of principles. If you go beneath the surface of a lot of, I suppose, religious teachings, dogmatism at that, top level, you shake it down to the original teachings of the main world religions, but also the ancient spiritual traditions. And they all talk about, ourselves as being microcosms of a macrocosmic consciousness. Einstein called it cosmic mind. We may call it God, spirit, whatever we do want to call it. But essentially that when we come into our human form, we take on a personality, but that personality is a tiny part of our overall consciousness, our soul, if you like. And so what I was experiencing all my life, and then in the late 90s, it suddenly went on to a whole new level. I started to experience how my own personality, my own persona consciousness was expanding beyond those perceived barriers, boundaries, limitations, whatever you want to call it, and connecting to a much higher transpersonal sense of who I really was. And as I travelled the world, I was recognizing and working with and exploring with others, the elders of many traditions who were also experienced this, if you like, move between our personal sense of who we are and a much greater sense of who we really are. And that has been the quest of the spiritual path, throughout time. But what I feel is happening now is it's available to all of us. It's not just the great mystics, the great teachers who've explored this path, and like Buddha achieved this sense of oneness, and as Jesus has, taught the oneness of love. It's there for all of us. So the eighth chakra really is my way of sharing how this is happening within all of us as we expand beyond those perceived limitations of a Jude and a Mark and whoever, to a recognition and a remembering of the vastness of who we really are. Right,
because you mentioned briefly about going on a series of journeys, which you did over a period of 5 years, and
Yeah.
the story of your journeys was published in the book The 13th Step. The book was about your mission to activate 12 solar discs at various ancient sites. I know we can't really go into too much detail, but because there's lots of places you went to, but you visited such countries as Egypt, Australia, China, Peru, Hawaii, and England, of course. What would you say were the highlights of this sacred journey?
Waking
are
up.
there too many to discuss? Yeah, waking up. You said, yeah.
I think the highlight was waking up, because I started those journeys having, getting on for 50 years, 45 years or thereabouts of these experiences, and feeling that an enormous transformative change was coming, not just for ourselves, but for Earth, Gaia as a living being, and as I felt, our entire solar system. And it was literally a step-by-step initiation, for want of a better word, into that understanding of how within our universe solar systems evolve. Just as people evolve and collective races evolve, so do solar systems. Our whole universe is a process of consciousness exploring itself and evolving. So it was an incredible ongoing experience of what was happening, what was expanding, and what was coming as we approach what the Mayan calendar called the end of an era. And many spiritual traditions and many elders perceive as the end of a great era of human evolution, and the beginning of a whole new level of our perception of who we are and what the world's about. And so to try and identify a particular highlight, the whole process, the whole journey that really lasted those 5 years, was truly a waking up, and an understanding of this incredible bigger picture perspective of what's going on, and that I wrote about in the 13th Step. And as you know, I continue to write about it in my latest book, which is called Hope, Healing Our People and Earth, because this is a healing process. It's literally a dismemberment of our collective persona and world into a whole remembering process of the wholeness of all that we call reality. Incredible moment.
You beat me to it there, because I was just about to mention Hope, because obviously it came out last year, but it's a book which looks in detail at the current situation in several countries in the world as we approach the 21st of December 2012. You mentioned countries like USA, the UK, China, Japan and Israel. Can you say why you chose these particular countries and not others?
Well, Hope could have been 5 times the size it was, but it's really distilling this understanding of profound interconnectivity of all that we are and all that we call reality. And as a healer, I've worked with many, many thousands of people around the world over many years. And what I've discovered, first of all, I use that word with care, healer, because my own sense is that we never heal anyone else. All we can do is be in service to empower them to undertake their own healing. But what I found was that within our personality energy field, which is how we experience being human, we embody all those experiences, but we also hold on to stuff. Let's face it, we all hold on to stuff, and we judge things, we judge ourselves, we play around patterns of behavior, etc. And I earlier mentioned that, the leading edge science now is understanding the world in the way that many ancient traditions did, is that everything not only is interconnected, but plays out on all scales, all levels, from the person to the family to the nation to the collective, from the most minute to the mightiest scales. Experiences and consciousness plays out. So the same sort of patterns we hold as individuals, patterns of abuse, abandonment, betrayal, rejection, denial, we play out within families and we play out in nations, and of course we play out collectively. So as part of the bigger picture of this shift, I wanted to share my